Kanvar threw himself from the tree branch and dove into the water below. He hit it hard, and his crossbow thumped against the back of his head as he went under. The weight of the sword and crossbow pulled him toward the bottom where the current caught him and dragged him along the mud and silt. He resisted the urge to swim his way back to the top and glanced up in time to see a sheet of blue flame turn the top layer of water to steam. He thrashed his leg and arms, trying to swim faster downstream, but only managed to flip himself over so his face pressed into the mud. His breath burst from his lips in a flood of bubbles. Kanvar panicked. He'd never been much of a swimmer, and weighed down with the weapons and armor, he found himself unable to maneuver in the rushing torrent. He saw another flash of blue above and behind him while he struggled to get his right leg under him and push off against the river bed. His chest burned from lack of air, and water sucked in through his nose. He could die. The thought spurred him to thrash harder in an attempt to reach the surface. Now he was sure he was beyond range of Dragonbund's fire. Chandran's earnest voice played in his mind. "You won't last a day out there." Rage filled Kanvar. He'd fought so hard to stay alive and take care of himself ever since his mother turned against him. He could not fail now. He would not die here under the murky black water. Something clammy swam past his arm, but he was fighting too hard to reach the surface to see what it was. It came again. Something big that caught Kanvar in its wake and pressed him up against the underside of the river bank. A sparkling black coil flashed past Kanvar's face. Kanvar's fingers brushed a tree root dangling over the edge into the water. He grabbed it and pulled himself upward. His head broke the surface. He coughed the water out of his throat and gasped for air. In the last bit of twilight he looked up on the bank above him and into the raging face of the blue dragon. Dragonbund had followed him downriver. "Fool," Dragonbund growled. "Do you think I don't know which way water runs? Even blind I can find my way downhill." He swiped a claw toward Kanvar. A great black serpent shot out of the water and struck Dragonbund's claw. The serpent's two long fangs sank past the scales into Dragonbund's flesh. Great black dragon venom was deadly to humans, who could expect painful cramping, then convulsions, followed by an excruciating death. Kanvar didn't know what the poison would do to a great blue. Dragonbund bellowed in outrage and struck at the great black with his other claw, intent on catching it and squeezing the life out of it. But the black dragon was fast. He'd bitten Dragonbund and shot back down into the water before the blue could catch him. Foam bubbled up between Dragonbund's jaws. He bit at his claw, enlarging the wound, sucking out the poison and spitting it toward Kanvar. A black coil wrapped around Kanvar's chest and dragged him back under the water. The great black kept its coils locked around Kanvar as it sped downstream. It moved through the water faster than a Murni schooner. Its body undulated in the water so that the coils which held Kanvar rose above the surface every few moments, allowing Kanvar a desperate gasp for breath now and again. Terror rose in Kanvar every time the coils drug him back under the water. The dark jungle flashed past above him, fallen into night. Trees became nothing more than towering monsters in the darkness. A thunderous crashing sound came from up ahead. The last time the coils brought Kanvar to the surface, he realized that the serpent was dragging him with great speed toward a cliff, over which the river spilled in a frothy roar. The coils tightened in one last surge, and the great black serpent shot over the edge of the cliff. The water fell nearly 200 feet straight down below Kanvar. The serpent spread webbed spines that ran along both sides of his body. They had been slicked down against its torso in the water, but now spread out into wings. Not like a great blue or great gold dragon's wings that could lift them off the ground in flight. The great black could not fly, but at this speed, from that height, it could glide out away from the pounding waterfall and deadly rocks at its base. It tucked its four stubby legs tight against its body to aid in the glide. Its trajectory took them out and down in a stomach-wrenching drop that landed them in a deep pool of the river. The spines flattened back against the black serpent's sides just before it hit the water. The momentum carried Kanvar, still clutched in its coils, down into suffocating blackness. Kanvar panicked, and struggled to break free of his captor. "Be still, little Naga." The serpent's voice came into his mind. "You don't want me to drop you now. I don't think you'll make it back to the surface on your own." Kanvar stopped thrashing and held his breath while the serpent rolled in the water and shot back up to the surface. It cut through the pool to the bank and used its stubby legs to pull itself and Kanvar up on shore. The coils unwound from Kanvar's chest and led him onto the fern-covered ground. Then the great black wrapped its body in a protective circle around Kanvar and snaked its head over to stare at him. Gasping for breath, Kanvar drew himself up to his knees and looked into the serpent's inky eyes. A silver fire emanated from the black dragonstone on its forehead. Pa! The serpent spit a string of venom well over Kanvar's head. Dar-Onadhar thinks he's lord of the whole jungle. You saved me, Kanvar said. He looked back upriver toward the waterfall, but saw no sign of Dar-Onadhar. I imagine His Majesty Raja Hansa would not be too happy with me if I had not. The serpent let out a long slow hiss. I'm guessing, from the looks of you, you're Amar's missing youngest son. We all thought you were dead, but not long ago Amar sent out a call that Dar-Onadhar had taken you, and Devaj as well. I couldn't save Devaj, Kanvar said. I tried, but Abba Vesima carried him away. Kanvar shuddered, sank to the ground, and checked to make sure his crossbow and bolts were still secure on his back and that he hadn't lost the sword in the river. He was glad to find everything in place, but he feared for Devaj's life. The serpent hissed again and laid his head down against his coils. Don't worry, little one. Raja Hansa will find a way to save your brother. Kanvar didn't know who Raja Hansa was, some kind of king, he supposed. He just hoped the serpent was right about Raja Hansa saving Devaj. Kanvar shivered. Now that he was wet, the air felt even colder than it had before. He pulled his knees up against his chest, trying to stay warm. My name is Indumali, the serpent said. I'll stay with you tonight and keep you safe. But in the morning I must return to the water. Kanvar nodded. He knew the great black serpents would dry and shrivel in the sun. But Indumali, how can I hear your thoughts? I haven't bonded yet. The cold bit into Kanvar and he started shivering. At the same time sweat trickled down his face and back. He felt a flash of searing heat and then another stab of sharp cold. He'd been able to hear the great blue dragon's voices as well. He didn't know why, and it spooked him. The serpent rubbed the sweat off Kanvar's forehead with the tip of its black tail. Its smooth scales felt cool and soothing against his skin. You have a fever. How long have you had it? It feels exceptionally high. Kanvar's teeth chattered. Indumali tightened his coils so they came to rest against Kanvar in cool soothing folds. I did not feel cold until just before I fell into the water. This high of a fever should not have come on you so fast, Indumali said. I don't understand it, nor how you can hear my voice in your mind if you've not yet bonded. With this kind of a fever you may not live long without bonding. Indumali bared his fangs and let out a worried hiss. Fear tightened Kanvar's chest. He'd known this day would come. Fought it off for so very long. He'd just met Indumali, but he felt safe with the serpent. May I bond with you? Indumali jerked his head up in alarm. It swayed back and forth, snake-like. Raja Hansa would kill me and nail my hide to his palace wall. Kanvar swallowed a lump in his throat and tried to stop shivering. Who is this Raja Hansa? Why should he care who I bond with? You do not know? Indumali rubbed the side of his head across Kanvar's cheek. No, I sense you do not. Raja Hansa is the king of all dragons. The great gold, descended in a direct line from his grandfather, Sukdirian, the supreme ruler of Stone Fountain before the Blues led their ugly revolt. Your father is bound to Raja Hansa. All Nagas must bond with the Golds. Raja Hansa picks those he feels are worthy, and they are presented to the young Nagas when they come into the fever. You must choose one of those Raja Hansa has picked to be your companion. A rebellious surge of anger spread through Kanvar. Why should he decide? What if I don't like any of the dragons he chooses? Indumali let out an angry hiss. You sound like one of those revolting blue dragons. They destroyed our whole society. I can't believe so many of the other dragons followed them. Hush now. You're hurt and you're sick. You don't know what you're saying. Indumali closed his eyes and thrust his head beneath his coils as if unwilling to continue the conversation. Shivering, Kanvar rested his shoulder against the coils. Indumali was right. He hurt too much to think straight. His right hand started to throb, and in his fevered delirium he imagined it swelled up and oozed blood out of two fang holes in the back of his hand. Indumali remained safely curled around him until dim light penetrated the high canopies, signaling the rise of the sun. Then the serpent stirred and unwrapped his body from around Kanvar. Little Naga. Wake up, little one. Kanvar heard Indumali's voice through the fevered fog of his mind. A serpent coil lifted Kanvar to his feet. Kanvar blinked and looked down at his right hand. It was normal-sized and unhurt. He shook his head. The pain in his hand must just have been a nightmare. The sun is coming up. I must return to the water, Indumali said. Follow the river downstream. There is a human village there, hidden from the bumbling Murnis. These humans can help you. Trust them. Kanvar swayed on his feet as Indumali slithered away and slid into the river. The morning was still early, but the jungle teemed with activity. Black monkeys swung from the trees, hunting the colorful jungle birds. The monkeys' screeches blended with the raucous bird calls and constant buzz of insects. Lizards skittered into the underbrush away from Kanvar's feet as he stumbled in the direction Indumali had shown him. The jungle air felt cold against his fevered skin. The cut on his right leg hurt like a firebrand. He tried to use his twisted left leg more to ease the pressure on his right, but the crippled leg failed him, and he tumbled into a thick patch of ferns. He lay on the wet ground and panting. The loamy scent of the jungle floor was so strong he could taste it. Water dripped from the fern fronds onto his hot cheeks. He gritted his teeth and tried to get back up, but both of his legs failed him. "No," Kanvar shouted in frustration. "By the fountain, I won't die here. Not like this." He'd known surviving in the jungle wouldn't be easy. But he hadn't counted on taking a deep wound to his good leg. "I can't let this stop me," he muttered, but fear snaked through his gut. He looked around for predators. Doubtless, he smelled like blood, and there were plenty of lesser dragons and other animals in the jungle who would make a meal of him if given the chance. The black monkeys had fallen silent and were staring hungrily at him from the trees. They would run from a healthy human, but had been known to pick dead bodies free of everything and scatter the bones beyond recovery. "Get lost." Kanvar waved his arms and shouted at them. But they remained in place on the branches, looking down at him. "Stupid monkeys." Kanvar crawled to a fallen log and tore a small branch off to use as a crutch. With the help of the crutch he managed to hobble a few steps. The band of monkeys screamed and scattered. Birds flew up in a rush of bright feathers. "That's right. You should fear me," Kanvar shouted after them. "I am a dragon hunter with a sword and a crossbow and armor." The insects fell silent. "Oh," Kanvar thought. "Maybe it's not me they're running from." The ferns rustled. Kanvar searched the leafy ground. The fern swayed again and aligned to his left. It had to be a lesser serpent. A big one. Hopefully not poisonous. The waving fronds ran in a circle around Kanvar. No time to load the crossbow. Kanvar propped the crutch up under his left arm and pulled the sword from its sheath. It felt heavy in his hand at first, too big for him, too awkward. Then the runes flared to life and the weight eased. The handle molded itself to fit his hand. The serpent circled one more time and then shot toward Kanvar. He still couldn't see it in the tall foliage, just its track. Which meant the serpent was ahead of where Kanvar imagined it. A green coil slammed against the back of his legs and knocked him to the ground. Then the serpent was on him, wrapping coil after tight coil around Kanvar's torso, but Kanvar had swung his sword arm out so it wouldn't be trapped against him. He hacked at the snake's body. The sword sank unhindered through the serpent. Kanvar barely stopped it in time from coming out the other side and slicing into himself again. The coils fell away from Kanvar, and he staggered to his feet. The massive serpent lay dead, severed in half except for a thin flap of skin. Kanvar wiped the green blood off the blade against Devaj's shirt, which was still bound over the wound on his leg. Then he sheathed the sword and retrieved his walking stick. A warm feeling of gratitude filled him that Devaj had taken the time to fasten the sword to Kanvar's belt. He must have hoped it would somehow keep Kanvar alive. It was an amazing sword. He'd loved looking at it as a child while his father polished and sharpened it. But it had only been a thing of beauty then. Now Kanvar realized it had to be something far greater. He rubbed the hilt and felt a tingle of magic spread through his hand and up his arm. Powerful magic. No wonder the Murni soldiers had feared to touch it and opted to burn it along with Devaj instead. Kanvar let his hand linger on the tingling hilt. He'd used the sword to blind Daran and Har, but there hadn't been time then to notice the power. Now Kanvar strained his fevered mind to remember early lessons about the fall of Stone Fountain and the Great War. There had been a legend in all of that about the Golden King who carried a magic sword, forged with all the skill of the ancients. It had powers birthed by the fountain and was a weapon created at the height of civilization for the most powerful man alive, Khalid, the Naga bound to the great gold dragon king. But Khalid had been murdered in his sleep at the start of the revolution. No one knew what happened to the sword. Kanvar imagined what it must have been like to live in the city at Stone Fountain before it fell. Legend said the streets and buildings were all made of gold. And the Golden King lived in a palace as big as all of Daro at the top of the hill where the fountain bubbled. It sounded perfect. Too perfect, and it had crumbled. Sweat trickled into Kanvar's eyes and violent shivers took him. His fevered mind imagined he heard Abba Vasema's voice once again. "And what do we have here?" The great blue dragon held Devaj's limp body. "Looks like the young Naga princeling. Such a fine prize." "Devaj is a prince," Kanvar muttered as he staggered his way along the river bank, pressing through the thick bushes and limping around wide trees that dangled roots and branches into the rushing black water. Son of the Golden King? Heir to the throne of Stone Fountain? But that would mean Amar, Kanvar's own father, was Khaled's successor. But it couldn't be. Stone Fountain had fallen 1,000 years ago. Amar couldn't be that old. Kanvar pictured Devaj's wild gold hair glimmering as it had when the soldiers marched him into the colony. Devaj had held his chin high and walked like a prince. Kanvar staggered and nearly fell. He felt ashamed of his crippled body more acutely than ever before. He was a cripple, twisted, ugly. He dared not stand before Raja Hansa, the great Dragon King, even if Raja Hansa was bound to Kanvar's father as Indumali had said. Kanvar stopped and leaned his stubby arm against a tree. It no longer hurt. Must not have been broken after all, he thought. He spread the 2 fingers and thumb that projected at the end of the odd-shaped limb. From there he looked down at his twisted leg and useless foot. Why, he cried. Why would Devaj risk his life to come in search of a little brother as repulsive and useless as I am? He had no answer. A piercing scream startled him from his fevered haze.